We got interested in this because we were running a small nonprofit in Central America, and we saw what it was like for people not to have enough economic well-being to go to the doctor or see the dentist, or buy things that they would have to buy as their society moved from a trading society. And everyone deserves to have enough economic well-being to buy the things they need and not just suffer because of it. And Sandra and our big reason for starting Del Cabo was to address that issue. Let's create an economic opportunity for people who want to farm, who want to grow food, to be able to make a decent living doing it.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture, all without toxic chemicals. You just heard from Larry Jacobs, who along with his wife, Sandra Belin, founded and runs the Del Cabo Jacobs Farm Cooperative, which supplies organic produce to North American markets. Larry and Sandra spoke to Dave about their work with farming communities both in Mexico's Baja Peninsula and the African country of Tanzania. In both instances, it took a lot of effort and relationship building to ensure that organic practices were preserved throughout the supply chain due to the pervasive nature of chemical use.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm talking today with Larry Jacobs and Sandra Belin, pronounced different ways, owners of Jacobs Farm in California, and certainly the inspiration, founders, and organizers of Del Cabo, which is a cooperative venture. I know it's not technically a cooperative, but it's a cooperative venture of small farms in Mexico. I'd like to, the symposium this year is going to be about the consolidation of power in the food system, which is getting more and more consolidated as we go along. And you've done an amazing job of providing a way for a whole lot of small farms to market together to an American audience and make a living. And make a much better living than they were able to make. Last time, Larry, you said that now the managers of the place are the kids of the first people who were farming, and they were able to send their kids to college because of this. It's an amazing thing to see that. Well, let me ask first, how's it going for them? I know from talking to many farmers that the market has gotten tougher and tougher in the U.S. And if you could describe why it's gotten tougher for people, I would appreciate it. Because the eaters have no idea about any of this. They don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Want me to take a crack at that? So we have to look historically at what happened during the pandemic. During the pandemic, the restaurant business shrunk because people weren't eating out. The retail business, so the people were cooking at home, so the demand for food at home and for demand for cooking and preparing food at home increased. We found ourselves in a very good market, a solid market that was able to provide a fair price to everything through our supply chain. And we experienced that through the pandemic. So every year at the quarterly, our team gets together and looks at how much product was produced compared to how much product was ordered by key customers, and then adjust 6 months ahead for how much should be planted. the attempt to synchronize how much is grown with how much we're going to sell. And ultimately, so we don't have, there isn't a lot of food grown that doesn't get sold. So just to be efficient. So we use the last 3 years' numbers, and we added a couple of percentage points of growth. But those included these pandemic years. So as we went into 2022, based on 2019, 20, and 21, with a little bit of growth in there, we implemented the production plan and bought seeds. Some of these seeds are pretty expensive, and organized how many hectares or acres were going to be planted. And that whole motor went into effect. And then along comes 2022, and the pandemic is ending. The number of people buying food in the supermarkets, people started going out to eat, so they were cooking at home a little bit less. And I suspect that what we did based on our last 3 years of numbers, other companies did as well. And there was a glut of product, all the different kinds of cherry tomatoes that Del Cabo specializes in on the market. Along with that, we found ourselves with the large conventional hydroponic players who had now slotted in some organic production. And they had planned their production based on the demand that they saw in 20 and 21, as we did. The end result was we had too much production for the market that we had. And at the same time, our new competitors were pretty good at knocking at doors and picking up some of our market share. So we lost a little bit of market share. So the combination of the two things, lots of production beyond what the demand was, other players with lots of production, and a loss of some market share due to competition, resulted in tough times over the last 2 years.
Prices went way down,
Yeah.
and that caused we'd have to cap what the growers were growing in terms of shipping to market. So there was product thrown away at the field level, thrown away at the packing level, thrown away at the warehouse level, and then that coupled with lower prices really made a sad state of affairs. And along comes inflation, the prices of everything, packaging went up, fertilizers went up, pest control, everything went up. And the peso was worth,
the dollar became worth less. And all of the Del Cabo growers their income is in dollars because the sales in dollars. And then they will take their dollar and convert it into pesos when they're buying things locally. So all of a sudden their sale value became less because the dollar became less. Mm-hmm. As well as their inflation for everything that they were doing, their fuel.
It was sort of like a perfect storm.
It was a perfect storm, yeah.
And so that's like 2022, and it's looking really bad for growers. And so then we think, okay, maybe 2023 will be better. And it became a little bit better, but not enough. Yeah. And then ironically now, for this growing season, it's a killer market. There's no tomatoes to be found anywhere. There's no herbs. Everything is in scarce supply. But we don't have the supply in part because of growers were desanimados.
Reluctant to come through and hit the plan the way it was planned.
Because they got burned.
Because it was such a bad year, the previous 2 years.
And that's a piece of it, but then it also was a weather factor.
There was a hurricane, there was frost, there was heat. I mean, the weather this changing weather patterns, unpredictable weather patterns is a part of it. It's
making it very challenging.
It's hard to plan. You've got to plan for the unpredictable. There's just no other way around it.
I sell a lot of little guy tomatoes, not on volume compared to you, but a lot of our crop is. And we had a rough time, but I didn't know these reasons. It's like people don't know why wasn't there any toilet paper? Why wasn't there any milk on the shelves at the height of the pandemic? Why weren't there any eggs? Did the farms suddenly stop producing? No, it's just that they were selling to the distributors who were selling to restaurants, and nobody's going to the restaurants, but they weren't set up to put that in little containers and take it to the stores. So
so people that had the retail part of the market did well
Yeah.
during the pandemic, and then afterwards, people that did well selling to food service, then that they suffered during the pandemic.
it seems
And
like a lot of
Afterwards, they did well.
the people who were booming during the pandemic, I mean, a lot of the small farms, there was kind of a collapse afterwards. There was a hope that people would continue to buy from CSAs and
Right.
directly from the farms, and I don't think that proved to be the
No,
case.
that kind of ended at the end of the pandemic.
In our case, it wasn't through the Del Cabo group. There's this 40 communities up and down the Baja Peninsula consolidated under this one logistics and marketing brand, and lots of teams doing a lot of the pieces, working with them. The primary sales through retailers, the large retailers. We don't do the big box stores, but everybody else. And during the pandemic, sales were good, and there wasn't things being left in there was efficiency. It was working really well. The plan was good. We're meeting the demand for what we had planned for each one of these different customers. We had projected what they were buying. We were hitting the numbers, and it was like, a machine.
So it's
it
like
was working.
Retail and CSAs, direct sales, all that, were pretty good during those years. But then it was the fall off when
People
all of a
started
sudden
going back
people,
out to eat.
changed
restaurants.
how they were. So then if people were doing food service, that was their chance to, if they had survived the pandemic.
So my experience of it is that so many of the chains I sold to are now owned by one chain. I mean, a Dutch multinational owns 3 different major outlets for us. And when that company buys these chains, it's not good for us. And I don't think it's good for the eaters, their customers. It's just good for the shareholders of Ahold, right? But I dread hearing any customer being bought up by a multinational, but at this point, they almost all have been. There are very few left. Wegmans is still out there, family owned, but Star got bought up, and Hannaford's got bought up, and Stop and Shop got bought up, and Giant got bought up, and Fresh Direct got bought up. And whenever they do, the culture changes. It takes a few years because the company goes, well, wait, let's see what happened. And then things go badly for people who offer what we offer.
Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah,
They're less forgiving. So it's sort of like you either need to you're measured on your fulfillment. And it's hard to be fulfilled when you're not to a certain scale. And we fall down on that. So we lose market because we don't fulfill those kind of guys.
You don't always have what they need.
Yeah, we'll gap.
Yeah,
We'll gap.
you have gaps.
we do a pretty good job,
Yeah,
but we're not. It's with these weather changes. If you get a hurricane, there's a hole in your production. So it doesn't wipe us out, but it decreases the volumes that we have, and we try every year to compensate for that. Let's plant a little bit more here and a little bit more. Let's move things around a little bit. And every year, there's an adjustment made, and the big investment we need to make as an organization is in season extending structures so that there's more overlap.
yeah.
And then we also have to get good at what to do if everybody comes in. If all this stuff really lines up, we don't want more than people are going to buy.
Right.
So there's a delicate balance there, because the food waste can be a real thing. If you have too much, then people are going to eat. And there's a bit of a crystal ball at figuring out what that number is. But then planting the right amount for that number that takes into consideration all the things that could go wrong is it takes some luck. I guess it takes some luck.
Yeah.
I mean, that magical moment that doesn't happen very often is when there's a high demand and a low supply, but you happen to have that supply, and the prices are way up. Yeah. And the reverse is the opposite, obviously, when there's oversupply and you're also oversupplied.
So the problems you're describing are the basic challenges of being in agriculture, but I have experienced problems that seem to have more to do with the agricultural systems of retail and distribution than they do with the challenges of being a farmer. And maybe that's not your experience. I'm curious, if you look at 8 years ago and you look at now, is Del Cabo growing or is it not growing?
Del Cabo's last 2 years is shrinking.
Shrinking.
And we'll see where this goes in the next 5.
Yeah.
It's going to depend a lot upon new leadership and younger people. And we've got the families that are involved today on the Del Cabo side, many are the grandchildren of the farmers and the families that we started with. And I can count on one hand the individuals who were in that first group in this room where we had this idea and planted the idea and asked, who wants to do this? I think there's 2 or 3 people out of 10 left.
Yeah.
So that's life.
Yeah. So it started as a small group, though.
Yeah, it started as 10 families, 10 individuals. 8. Well,
it turned out to be 8.
Turned out to be 8 because 2 dropped out.
Yeah.
There was enormous skepticism about the ability to grow crops at the Tropic of Cancer without all the new chemicals that were being promoted by the Ministry of Agriculture and being taught through the universities. Even though we saw that most of these farmers weren't using any of these chemicals, but they were hearing about them, and that the Ministry of Agriculture, the Department of Agriculture, was walking through these fields all through this county, and I think we were doing it all through the country, and whenever they would see an insect problem, they would require the grower to do something. Well, a lot of these guys didn't do anything because they didn't have the wherewithal to buy these chemicals, but they were being told they should. And if they didn't do something, they had to just down their crop, is what I was hearing. So there was a lot of pressure beginning. It's the very beginning of this idea you need to use these chemicals to control these insects. So we kind of showed up at a really critical time.
Just in time.
Just in time.
Yeah.
And the irony was that the Ministry of Agriculture, the local Department of Agriculture, was open to hearing about a different way to control the insects, and agreed to us providing a weekly workshop to their agronomist about biological control. And we were fortunate to have a guy like Everett Dietrich is mentoring us on how to do this stuff. And so we provided classes to the local the Ministry of Agriculture agronomists, who were the ones going out in these fields and telling the guys they got to spray.
You were providing classes for the government agronomists.
Yes, the local government agronomists, 2 times a week in the afternoons.
Fantastic.
And after a couple of months, they were very excited about biological control and how to do it. And they became our extension workers. And that was sort of the chip. They got the chip. They got excited about how well biological control worked, and they became evangelists for biological control in the county. At one point, we proposed a change in the legislation for the state to make that county, to require all farming in the county to be organic. The flip side was the hotels were spraying their ornamentals for these exotic insects they would bring over, for the ornamentals they bring over from the mainland, which would eventually become our problem.
Yeah. They resisted the idea of going without chemicals.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was not a popular idea.
There was a parallel development happening because there weren't really very many hotels when we were there, but that was just starting to go, and it was beginning to change the landscape to being a tourist destination. And I mean, the airport was
Palapa was,
nothing.
There was a palm leaf roof, and you kind of walked in and walked out, and it was delightful.
I mean,
and
you
today,
go out on the tarmac and load the plane kind of thing,
right.
With your old jalopies, it was before high security, and so it was a different era. But the whole community really got behind this because this was seen as a way to bring income into the community through agriculture. It was an agricultural community, but they had no market for what they were growing. And so people, the customs people, the Federico, who was the equivalent of the USDA there, that did the inspections, everybody was just way into making it. They bent over backwards.
We had a funny story that one of the growers who provided a lot of leadership to the co-op down in the tip of the Baja, who passed away from COVID, he would tell this story that we'd go into, that Sandra and I would show up in a field to work with these guys. And some of the kids came up to us and would say to their dad, "Tell Larry and Sandra we ran out of milk. We need more milk for our coffee." Well, we were providing them milk as an insect and a virus control mechanism. Yeah. But the kids, "Tell Larry and Sandy we need more milk for our coffee."
Yeah.
But it was a good experience.
I think the best story about it, if we're going to go down memory lane, I don't know if we want to do that, but it was the Dono Turo story. I don't know if you already told that story, but that's just classic on how to get your head on straight on what's important. The punchline of the story with him.
So Dono Turo is the director of, was the head of customs in the county of San Jose del Cabo. He had an office in downtown. There was a big door with a big skeleton key to open the door, and there were several desks inside. At one time, this must have been a place with a lot more activity, because when you went into his office, it was dark and dusty, and the typewriters on all the desks were covered in cobwebs. That's how often they were used.
And they were the old-fashioned kind, you know that.
Not electric typewriters. This was 1985, 1986. And we had no idea how to get this stuff out of the country, export what was going to be required. So went and talked to the head of customs, and he listened to what we wanted to do, and he didn't explain what we needed to do. He just said, "Come back a couple hours before you're going to have your first shipment." So we did come back a few hours, and he asked us how many boxes and how many kilos and what was the product. And then the typewriters were standing up on their backside. He flopped down the typewriter. He pulled 5 pieces of blank white paper and 4 pieces of carbon paper in between them, rolled them in the typewriter, and began punching with 2 fingers the M key. I didn't understand what he was doing, but this was like a laborious thing, and he was clicking the thing and rolling the paper up and down. And we're supposed to go to the airport with this load of summer squashes, and I think it was mostly cherry tomatoes. And he was doing something, and then he put in some numbers, and when it was all done, I don't remember how long it took, but it seemed like it took forever. I said, well, I got to run. Is it done? He said, yeah, it's done. And he pulled out something and he stamped, and he handed me the form. And I'm racing back to the airport and I'm looking at this thing, and he had created this beautiful form with squares and rectangles for putting in data, the date and what the product was, and a harmonized tariff code for the export, and how many kilos it was, and how many kilos per unit, and the extension of it. And it was all this official, typewriter made customs form.
Yeah.
That was okay. So we got the first one out. A few days later, I came back to do another one, and he pulls out 5 pieces of paper, 4 pieces of carbon, rolls the thing up. But during this whole process, he's asking me questions, and we're talking, and he's telling me about the sugarcane production and the export of beef from the area when he was a kid. And I'm hearing this rich history of the area, and he's asking me questions. And so this happened, for like a week or two. And one day I just look at, God, it's an hour sitting in waiting for him to make this form.
I'm going to make his job easier.
I'm going to make his job easier. So I took the form and I whited out just the information that he was typing in that I would give him. And there was actually a photocopy machine in town. I went and photocopied like 30 of these things and showed up with the carbon paper all set up, and all he had to do was put in the numbers. And he looked at it.
Crestfallen.
Yes, he was. And he looked up and he said, yeah, but you're going to leave in a few minutes. And the hour that we were there talking was really important to him.
Yeah.
At the
There's
time,
that exchange more than anything.
And at the moment we were living in a world, well, we got to get the shipment out, and we had to get this, but there was this other side that we learned that was really important, was the time with this older man. He must have been, almost our grandparents' age, who was sharing the stories and enjoying the interchange, the interaction that he was having with these 2 foreigners in his office.
Yeah. It's all very personal. Everything you're talking about, that you're training these agronomists to learn about biocontrol, and this is people talking to people, and it's not transactional in the way that we think of business. Of course, there's money, there's business, people are trying to make a living, but there's something else.
And the Dono Turo hit us. We really we learned something from Dono Turo that, in a way that that was unexpected. And it was at a time when the Americans say, well, you're going to deal with Mexican customs, they're going to ask for a bribe. They're going to want money from you to do this. That never happened. Yeah. In fact, when somebody who worked for him did insinuate that they wanted a bribe for something we were importing, the guy got scolded.
How many families are part of Del Cabo now?
I don't know. There was over 1,000, and there's probably close to 400. Between 300 to 400 today.
Yeah, amazing. I have to ask, do you feel a sense of personal responsibility to make this work for these human beings?
Of course.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is, I think we're old enough and realistic enough to be in a place that things are, a seed sprouts, it grows, and it dies, and things have their life in their time. Some things last longer than others. We'll see where this thing goes. We're working on moving it into a trust model after what we saw the organically
grown
grown co-op do, and what the clothes company that did set up a trust.
Patagonia.
Patagonia.
Yeah.
And the trust seems like a good mechanism for holding an idea, a company that was started with some very clear objectives that were grow food in a way that's healthy for people and for the environment, and do it in a way that improves the economic well-being for these families that are growing food, and do it so it's economically sustainable. Don't do it as a nonprofit. Make it so it pays its bills and pays for its own innovation and generates its own capital that ultimately you can use to help nonprofits do other things, but pay your own way while you're doing that.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of our effort this year has been, we've made several trips down to the Baja after 2 years or more not going down because of the pandemic. We stopped traveling, and that it's trying to gauge, well, where are the growers now? How much does this mean to them having this market, and are they ready to throw in the towel or not? And we get the feedback, and we don't know if we get the 100% truth, because there's always the other side where the frustrations are certainly there, because the market hasn't been kind to the growers the last few years. But there's the feeling that this is their livelihood, this is their lifestyle, this is what they've done, and this is their legacy with their family. So they have their kids and their grandkids involved, and this is the world they know. And so I think they don't want to let go of it, and they want to make it work. So that's the task at hand. How do we evolve to be a smaller movie before we maybe get bigger again? And what's happening with the market, and what's happening, how can we grow more efficiently? What tools are needed in this 21st century that would be helpful in farming more economically?
Yeah.
And there's the labor in Mexico, there's a labor shortage too. So, it goes all the way around.
There's some very, I think both Sandra and I got a big shot in the arm as we were visiting and working with these different families, because there was definitely clear enthusiasm to let's power through this, let's find some answers. And the exciting stuff has been, there's a lot of excitement around worm composting right now. And a lot of the farms are building small worm raising operations and how to extract the juices from the worms. And everyone is seeing this as working, and how do we manage this soil fertility in a way that lowers the cost while improves the productivity and improves the soil life. And this seems to be working. And there's each one of these communities and individual, they're all excited about. There's an enormous amount of excitement about it, and building. We just shipped a bunch of old barrels that we're cutting in half, and for some of these small farms, you put together 10 of these half barrels, and they become little worm farms.
Yeah.
And out of the bottom of the barrels, you take out the exudates, and now you run that exudates back into your irrigation system, and that seems to be working in terms of extending the harvest period for a single planting, where you have a fixed cost. It can be pretty significant per hectare. And now you can be harvesting over a long period of time, which means more high quality units without having to replant, which means, okay, now maybe we can compete with these hydroponic guys on price, if that's what we have to do. But let's find ways to really grow crops that are healthy and have that flavor that we were known for all these years.
Yeah.
And this seems to be, there's a lot of excitement. It seems to be working. So that's that's scaling right now. As we're sitting here, lots of people are doing this right now and working on scaling the worm farming as a adjunct to the cherry tomato and the zucchini and the garlic and the peas and everything else.
At our conference in Churchtown last fall, we had a woman named Zephyr Teachout come and speak. She wrote a book called Break 'em Up.
Break them up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she goes right for it. She's a law professor. She's really good on antitrust. And she believes we actually have the laws, we just don't enforce the laws. And that it would be illegal for a company to be 6% of the market, let alone 70% like Driscoll's is. I mean, it's beyond illegal, right? But the federal government's not enforcing those laws, and that really changed in the Reagan era. Before that, they were using those laws. Some of them are very old, right? Some of them were from 1900, but she, in her book and actually in her talk, she talks about being chickenized, and she's looking at the poultry industry, and the model that they have for scaling is they have many small chicken farmers that sell to these 4 meat giants. And the deal is that those chicken farmers have no control over anything. They have to buy their baby chicks from the person the company they're contracted with, and they have to do things exactly as the company wants, when the lights go on, when the lights go off. The only thing they have any choice about is how much they pay labor, right? Which they can't afford to pay almost anything, because they don't have any control over the price of the market. They're essentially serfs in this system, and they're sharecroppers. So that is such stark contrast to what you're talking about in the relationship between you and all of the farmers of Del Cabo. I just want to call that out, that this is a different model for how we could feed ourselves. And those tomatoes are in the store, and they're very good. And, Paul Hawkins told me once about you guys, they do everything right except for one thing. I've told you this. They don't tell their story, because their story is amazing. And we need to find ways to market the truth, because people will respond to that if we can figure out how to do it.
And I would answer, hey, hi, Paul. We tell our story really well. Eat our fruit. It's all in eating it. And the words it's smoke and mirrors. It's produce the crop. And then if you're interested in how it's being grown and the people that are growing it, we're happy to tell you about that.
Yeah.
But the important thing is providing people really good food and doing it in a way so that people are making a decent living doing it. And
it's all about the growers.
It's all about the
the
farmers.
growers. I mean, it wouldn't exist if growers weren't all in.
Yes.
And there will be some fallout, of that. I mean, that's what's happening. The agronomists are going, well, this guy's heart's really not into it anymore. They're the 3rd generation, and they're not really a farmer, not like their dad, not like their grandfather.
Yeah.
And so there are some people that will fall to the wayside, but the guys that are all in, I mean, that's what we're here to support.
Absolutely. But I have to disagree with you a little bit.
Oh, I hear what you're saying.
Because I saw Del Cabo for years on the shelves. I had no idea that you were any different from, Sunset or Wholesome Harvest or any other big company selling tomatoes, cherry tomatoes on the market. But you are very different. It's very different. And I think that the difference is absolutely we should be able to taste it, and we can. But that is not going to be enough. We know that. Doritos sell really well, and they're basically bad for you.
Yep.
It's bad food. There's a lot of bad food, junk food. It's really bad for people, but they buy a lot of it. So I think that we need to give people a true story about why this matters, why it's different. And you have such an exceptional opportunity, because the real story, you don't have to whitewash it or greenwash it. You just have to tell the truth. Is remarkable. People do care about worker welfare. They don't care as much as they should. They need to learn about it. But they do. Well, this is the best worker welfare. Small farmers making a living tending their small farms.
We believe me, we believe in that.
I know.
And we agree. We got interested in this because we were running a small nonprofit in Central America, and we saw what it was like for people not to have enough economic well-being to go to the doctor or see the dentist, or buy things that they would have to buy as their society moved from a trading society. And everyone deserves to have enough economic well-being to buy the things they need and not just suffer because of it. And Sandra and our big reason for starting Del Cabo was to address that issue. Let's create an economic opportunity for people who want to farm, who want to grow food, to be able to make a decent living doing it. And let's work our ass off to make it happen. Yeah, I don't know if it's good or bad that we've got to sell to. We used to have the market is consolidated, and there are less retailers than there were 50 years ago. I don't have any control over that. No. But what we do have some control over is we can work to consolidate a lot of small growers to be able to fulfill the needs of what these bigger retailers require to be on their shelf, and be the opportunity for a small family-run farm to be able to have that channel and make a decent living doing it, and have the support of the back office support that they couldn't afford otherwise. Yeah. To get into those on that shelf space. And food safety issues of how do you comply with all those food safety regulations and well enough to pass the audits? How do you learn about it? How do you do all the record keeping? How do you create those systems so that a guy with a few acres can afford to do all that stuff?
There's a few of them that are refusing. Are going, forget it, it's too many.
Even our farms in California, sometimes why are they wanting us to do that? Why can't we use peanut butter in our mouse traps? Because of an allergen. But just providing the support and the organization.
I think initially we were a vehicle to connect the people that had no connection to market in a wealthier part of the world, and we were a vehicle for that. So it was all about connecting markets, connecting people and their livelihood, which was farming, with a market that could pay them decent wage for their product.
Because they wanted to buy an iPhone just like we do.
There weren't any iPhones back there. There wasn't even a telephone line, so we had to set up a radio to communicate. So it was way before any of that. Yeah. And then it was having the support staff now, as more rules and regulations came on, the Organic Act and all that paperwork that needed, then the food safety and all of that. And so we have people that deal with that day in and day out, that support growers in getting all their I's dotted and their T's crossed, so that they pass all of that. Gobbledygook. It's complicated.
It's complicated, and it's a beautiful thing. Let me ask. We've never talked about it. I know that you attempted to do something like this in Africa.
We did.
It didn't work as well.
It was a bigger lift. The bureaucracy in East Africa was daunting. We were working with a company out of Rotterdam, and the crop that we were going to grow for export was red curry squash and butternut squash, because the logistics were something, we needed to grow something that would last and arrive in good condition on a marine ocean carrier. It was the distance to market was just too far, unless you were to put things on planes, and the cost of putting things on planes was extremely high. And so we had developed, connected with the market. So the market piece was there. It was like 60 marine containers of red curry and butternut squash. We researched, picked varieties from a reputable seed source, a seed company, European seed company, that would be resistant to some of the diseases that we identified in the area, that had decent yields and they had good flavor. We just didn't expect the 5 species of fruit flies that we discovered that the best agronomist that we could hire had no idea was even a potential problem. So there was both agronomic issues that had to be resolved. The organic certification took 3 years because we had to transition ground that was there was ground that didn't have chemicals applied to it, but it was still a 3-year transition process for the certification, for the European certifier to accept it. A good example was just how long it took to open a bank account and to get the company registered in the country. To get a driver's license was a stack of papers like this, and
10 trips.
Maybe 3 or 4 trips to the bank and back.
And materials were really non-existent, so it meant usually getting to Kenya to get pallets. I mean, wood was plentiful, and the forests in Tanzania supplied the wood, but nobody was making pallets. So box manufacturing. I mean, and then just the reality people had grown up with was to load things by the pallet load with a forklift was really foreign. People didn't grasp that that was a tool that would be really helpful instead of handling one by one, everything.
We had a warehouse, we had a forklift, we had pallets. The truck would come with supplies on pallets, and then we would come up to see how the unloading was coming, and they were doing it all by hand.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, everywhere you would just see it. It was astounding. I mean, but as a people, Africans were just over the moon friendly and willing to do just about anything. They were some of the nicest people we've ever met.
Was the farming, before you got there, basically self-sufficiency or a local economy of farmers markets?
it was so people would farm. It was very much what we saw in Latin America. People would grow maize and beans, and that probably came about because of the Portuguese from Latin America. But maize and beans was the basic crop, and anything left over would be sold. And then there were some
finger millet and manioc.
Yeah, were more traditional
taro.
African crops, and taro. And then there were some vegetables being grown in specific areas. Tomatoes and onions. And there was all these sukuma wiki. It was a Swahili word for every week. So it was a kale, kind of a kale that was a perennial kale, and they would strip the leaves as the plant got bigger and bigger and bigger. So sukuma wiki every week. And those would go to the local markets. So
there's an eggplant, a local eggplant, a small yellow eggplant.
But we
small tomatoes.
We were in 6 villages.
Onions.
And we were growing.
Another one.
In Tanzania. We had established it. There was about 300 families. By the time we stepped back from it and passed it on to another board, to another
organization,
to another CEO, we handed it off.
And it joined forces with another existing business that was doing sunflower oil and pulses. dried beans.
And when we stepped back after 5 years and handed it off, we had ground certified, we had irrigation systems set up, we had farmers knowing how to grow these crops. They were growing. We'd introduced some improved varieties of onions where they were really happy with the varieties because their yields were better. We had identified a new tomato pest, what was it? Tuta absoluta. You know what that is in English? It's a bad one.
Yeah.
But it wiped out the tomatoes in Italy for a while. It came from South Africa.
Yeah.
South America, excuse me.
Yeah.
And so we found it and reported it to the Minister of Agriculture. We researched what the biological controls were. We worked with a Brazilian semiochemist who had a company in Riverside who developed an attractant that he combined with a pyganic product that would attract it and stop the fly from spreading. We created these little solar lamps with water with a little soap on it that would catch the males at night. And with some tools, we were able to manage this thing without any toxic chemicals, because even the toxic chemicals didn't work. Yeah. You know, they're just going to develop resistance when they did. So we had some things going, and the red curry squash and the butternut squash we were able to sell locally to the expat community, and it was just now a matter of scaling it and working out the bugs. And then as we told our board, look, we're not spring chickens anymore. It's time to find some younger blood here and to pass this on. And they wanted to scale it. They wanted to grow it much faster. They wanted to go to 100,000 families, and we were at 300. And it had taken 5 years to get there. Yeah. But we had agronomists. We had an accounting staff. You know, we had some salespeople. We had a team. And that was half the battle. Because when the first day we were there, who do we ask to do things? It was just us, and we didn't speak Swahili. Yeah. We didn't know, you know, even which side of the street to drive on. So,
did you live there for 5 years?
We lived there for 5 years.
Wow.
So we built a team, and we had to weed through a few people that one who was writing up fake invoices to get reimbursed for his travel, and we got a good team together. They were solid. They worked together. They understood. Every one of the agronomists we had to retrain because they came out of the best university in the country, and what they were taught was organic, was low yield and high cost. We had to teach them. It's low cost and high yield. And when they started seeing it, that was a reality, that we get comparable yields and we could do it at lower cost by using local materials and stop using these expensive chemicals. They go, this actually might work. Yeah. So there was this mindset coming out of the university still. It was like here in the 60s and 70s, where the new way and the right way to do it was with all these chemicals, of course, you know, all the Bayer stuff and the Syngenta chemicals. And yeah. They said, no, we need cover crops. We need to work on soil fertility. We need to bring life back into the soils. You need more organic matter. Look at the organic matter levels. It's happening when you take samples from these fields where you're using urea. You burned up all the nitrogen, all the organic matter. You're going to start to have problems there. And they were. That was a reality.
Did you encounter any of the Gates' effort at bringing the Green Revolution to Africa? Was that in Tanzania?
It was. We didn't work with it.
Yeah.
We didn't interface it. You know, it's interesting when you bring a market to people, they're enthusiastic. Yeah. And so we made some really good friends with some of these farmers. And these guys worked really hard. People weren't using tractors. They were working up fields with a hoe.
Yeah. The land was pretty marginal. I mean, most of the land didn't qualify to had chemical exposure. And so some of the pieces of ground were pretty marginal and stony that hadn't had that exposure to chemicals. And yeah. So it was a tough haul, especially around that area where we were, around Arusha area. And farther afield, there was more ground that was pure still.
Hadn't
But
had chemicals on it. But the team that came in after us wanted to grow it much faster, made the decision to buy an existing company that was growing and exporting
The
sunflowers and pulses. And they had a very good idea, and that was to have this hub and spoke system where you'd have a hub of services and equipment and tractors, some harvest equipment and stuff, that would reach out to so many kilometers around it and replicate that all over the country. But our point was, look, the market's organic. That's the growing market. Stay focused on the organic. They lost that. And they were doing trials with it, but then they would take ground that we had gotten certified, it was clean and never had anything on it, and they would put chemicals on it. And we were like, this is our last month here, and this is the wrong thing to do, guys. Yeah. Preserve that ground that didn't have any chemicals on it and get it certified. Certainly don't use the chemicals on any of the organic ground. And without something happening when we stepped back, they brought on some other agronomists with this other company that didn't have the same. We had built this DNA into the small team that we had, who were beginning to sound like organic enthusiastic, where they would say, these chemicals are bad. We're poisoning ourselves. We shouldn't be using it. We can do this with biological control. But now they had bought this other company, and they had their melting the two cultures together. And it was a bigger company with all existing exports. And they were dry farming. They were farming with the rains. That was the other comment we had to them was, look, you can't depend upon the rains in East Africa. You need to have irrigation. And you need to deal with flooding. So if you got fields where you got to put in ditches. You got to be now before the rains come. And sure enough, they had a couple years of either they got flooded out or they got the rainfall was so low, and they weren't putting more organic matter into the ground, which would have helped with the drought and stuff. And so they after a couple of years, they pulled the plug.
Yeah.
It was heartbreaking to us because we put 5 years into it, and the base was there. And they could have stuck with an East African market.
I think there were also some issues of corruption that came out that we're not quite sure what it was, but I mean, that was really common corruption in every aspect of doing anything there, that you really had to
keep your antennas out.
Yeah.
It was a good experience for us.
Yeah.
As always, we learned a lot.
Yeah.
We came back with little bit of another language, welots of friends.
Yeah.
No, we're still in communication with a lot of them.
With some of these guys.
Yeah, no, they make lifelong friends for sure.
All right, let me ask you a few other questions. One is, there's been a challenge to the idea of these group certifications in Southern Hemisphere. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of that. And the concern is that there's a lot of room for fraud. And of course, I would like to also talk about the room for fraud in America.
Yeah.
So, but let's start with those group certifications. What do you think? Do you think, yeah, it's pretty dodgy, or do you think, no, it actually works pretty well? Obviously, it makes it possible for these small farms to get certified. And
right. So we worked with when we first started this thing in '85. We had to figure out how we going to certify hundreds of farms in a way that was affordable, and we wanted to work with a certifier that had integrity. We chose Oregon Tilth as a certifier. And we worked with Oregon Tilth.
At the time, CCOF was not certifying outside of California.
Yeah, we first asked CCOF, and they did not want to go outside of California. But Oregon Tilth was willing to do that. And their first two inspectors came down, and they said, look, we'll go to every farm. Every single farm. They started at sunrise and came in at the end of the day. It was dark. We'd see them show up, and they were covered in dust, and went to every single farm. And said, look, let's develop some kind of a system where you're coming in and checking some number of these farms, and checking our system, our internal system, to maintain the integrity of it. Because there's no way for you guys to be looking at these farms multiple times a year. You're going to show up once. There's got to be a lot more integrity if there's integrity in our own internal system to really manage this thing. So with the organic, what
What are you trying to say?
with the certifier that we're using, with Oregon Tilth, we developed a system, and what would be a good system would work, and that's a system that Oregon Tilth promoted and worked with to be used for small-scale farmers.
So it also worked too as an internal system across growers that is because they were shipping as a group and it needed to be organic, legitimately organic, with no pesticides, residual, all of that kind of stuff, is that everybody would lose if they found one box. If somebody screwed up, everybody would lose. So the farmers self-policed each other. And I think that really kept people honest, because you didn't want to be the person that would screw up.
Right.
And everybody was related too. So, I mean, they really made it so that, there was no temptation.
But we also had our own independent team of agronomists that were in their fields constantly.
Yeah.
And they weren't there to inspect their organic practices. They were there to monitor their insect and disease pressures, to work with them on how to resolve these things. We did have some rules, like you had to have a cover crop. You had to apply some compost. And if you don't do the cover crop, you don't get the starts the next season. There had to be a little bit of a hammer and stick for some individuals. But our agronomists understood the integrity of the system was critical. And so we had eyes and ears on these fields all the time, not that there was mistrust.
I still think it was that
there
informal
was a lot
thing.
Of informal
I think
thing I agree
that
with you.
people really didn't. They were afraid. They didn't want to be in that position of being somebody that would screw it up for everybody.
The irony was the one grower that we threw out was an American grower who had really asked us to join the group because he wanted to be part of the sales and the logistics and all the backup support. And our team found residues and open materials in his warehouse, and that was it. There was no discussion at that point. He was done, and
it was a third of the way up the peninsula.
Yeah, it was not close to it, but it was. But the fact that it was an American, it was ironic, I thought.
Yeah.
We
don't know if it was him or one of his guys just decided to.
We don't know. And we had the one incident we had with the growers in the co-op was the use of chlorine in a well, and that when they used the chlorine to disinfect the well, it didn't get reported, and our agronomist red flagged that. It said, "Look, we got to check. This has got to go through our certifier. This isn't okay." And ultimately, it was okay, but it was interesting to see our system work.
It worked. Yeah. Okay. So at least for the farms you're working with, it seems like a very fair system that has integrity.
I think, yeah. It's got a lot of integrity. It would be really hard it would just be very cost prohibitive. The cost of the certification would be astronomical to every year, because you got little farms that some are an acre, and you're driving these dirt roads to get to these little farms. They're not all compacted in one place.
What would somebody gross off 1 acre?
They could be grossing $30,000.
Yeah. So hard to pay for a certification out of $30,000.
It starts to get really expensive.
Yeah.
But I would just go back. I think where this is more applicable is the coffee and the chocolate growers. These are all little tiny farms. Some of them, they're carrying the sacks of stuff out on their backs or on burros out of the mountains. And to get up to these places and to visit all these ranches. But I do think you need a robust internal system. And that internal system needs to be audited and checked and reviewed and to keep people honest.
Yeah.
And
so what about in America, in the United States of America? I know that you discussed with Ariel some cases that you know that were fraud.
So Chuck Benbrook has been collecting a lot of the data, the residue data that's publicly available that I guess it's the EPA or FDA collects from the grocery stores. And a couple years ago, you could look at the data. There was a lot of spinach coming out of the desert that had fungicide residues on it they weren't materials that were permitted on organics. And I don't know if they were even within the limits of what would have been even unconventional stuff, but certainly was not an organic material. And it was repeatable. You could see these tests were coming up positive. And these were certified organic products. As far as I know, nothing ever happened. So there's the integrity within the system. It's really
I think in the past we've reported cases.
We've had in our own case,
no action is taken.
Or at least we're not aware of it. There was when basil had this mildew on it that really wiped out the basil in Mexico. Our basil production was significant for what we were doing. At one time, we were shipping 60,000 pounds a week of basil from all these little tiny farms that was consolidated into 60,000 pounds a week. And that was putting kids through college and really paying, allowing families to support themselves well. But this mildew wiped it out.
Yeah.
And that ended the basil production for a while. And we kept seeing other companies shipping organic basil. And some of our large customers were saying to us, look, we're going to drop you. You guys aren't supplying us. And the other guys have it. And then we'd have our weekly production meetings and we'd talk to the agronomists. They said, look, these other guys are doing it. Figure it out. And so our team developed a screening method for mildew, which was a flat of basil plants with their first or second true leaves, with 20,000 spores per milliliter of mildew, which would spray on the plants on the flat, and then we have another flat that you wouldn't spray, and then we would cover that with a plastic container and have the humidity would be really high and have it at 25 degrees Celsius, which was the optimal temperature for the fungus to develop. And we could tell, and we could spray all kinds of stuff. So we tried every material that was approved for organic certification for controlling funguses. And we'd spray the material on, and then we'd spray our solution of spores on, and we cover it up and set it in our little incubation room and come back a couple of days later and check. Nothing worked. So our team developed that process, and they went through methodically and tested every material that was registered with OMRI and that would be approved by Oregon Tilth. Nothing worked. Zilch. And so they came back and said, look, there is no material to control this. We are separating the plants out to have more air circulation. We're doing everything we can to keep them dry. But when the conditions are right for moisture on the leaves, there is no way to stop this disease. We need to develop some genetic resistance to it. But in the meantime, this is it. And there's no way. And then we'd say, but these other guys are doing it. And they said, finally, out of frustration, they said, they're cheating. We don't believe it. We've tried everything, and we're not going to do anything else. We're going to work on developing the genetic resistance, and we're working on cultural practices. But you just got to believe us and we don't believe that these guys are doing it. So we went out and bought samples in the supermarkets and tested them, and everyone had residues of conventional fungicides over and over again. I think we did it 3 times. So it wasn't hundreds of tests, but 3 times. And we supplied that and provided that information to the state of California. We don't know if anything ever happened. But
yeah, okay.
That's our story.
That's his story.
But there's a rainbow here. 3-4 years later, we developed a resistant variety with our own little in-house breeding team, without a lot of money, with no outside capital, just observing. And Sandra and I went out and collected seeds from wild basil plants in the Zanzibar archipelago in the Indian Ocean, and we brought all those seeds back, and our team grew them out and crossing. And
they had a different use. They had, I don't know how many varieties, but they had a use for every different variety. And they made brooms out of some of the basil branches. But everyone had a different name and a different use. Yeah, they were all basils.
We had to learn all these different Swahili names for basil. But they were all different, and they all smelled. But there was some resistance in there, and we got lucky. Our team got lucky, and something crossed, and it had resistance because we had a screening process. We could screen it, and we could see, ooh, we sprayed with the 20,000 spores per milliliter. It's a lot, and nothing got sick, or half the tray didn't get sick.
Yeah. Okay. All right, it's a little bit late. Let me just, do you have anything you want to say, last stuff that's important to, that you think that should be spoken?
Yeah, I think that don't give up. There are solutions to difficult problems, and the tortoise usually wins the race. We just got to be persistent and keep trying, despite all the things that seem to be going wrong in the world. Life is getting better if we look at it over a long enough frame of time, and it's all of our collective energy to try to get to a better place. And just we got to be optimistic and keep trying.
And it's an exciting time in ag right now. There's a lot of new inventions and a lot of new tools and a lot of innovation happening. It makes it really exciting times that didn't exist even a few years ago.
Yeah, it may be that this confluence of Moore's law of faster computers and vision technology will result in tools that are affordable for a small family farm to be able to grow crops really well and take a lot of the labor out of it and bring back an economic life to these small 5, 10, 20 acre farms. We hope so.
All right, Sandra, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well so that others can find us. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.